Hi, and welcome to a brand new video on the Target Individual Program, the Target Individual Experience. This is going to be a short video, probably half an hour. I'm not at my computer desk, I'm not home, so the format is not how I would like it to be. It's somewhat how I like it to be, but without my computer with my new format, this video will not be like that. But anyhow, um, there are certain videos that I want to do, and this is one of them. And I'm going to talk about the attack on the truth and how those in power are manipulating us in order to remain in power and to take the focus off of themselves and put it on to the everyday citizen. It is their agenda to keep us separated, divided, for that simple reason, to control us. Make no mistake about it. And particularly with the development of technology, and it has become easier than ever for them to control our thought patterns, our behaviors, our thinking, and our collective consciousness. So, without further ado, I would like to play this video. I'm not going to play all of it. It is from the Academy of Ideas, very, very informative YouTube channel that has put out countless videos talking about social issue, and one of them is propaganda. So let's begin.
The American historian Howard Zinn wrote, "If those in charge of our society, politicians, corporate executives, and owners of press and television, can dominate our ideas, they will be secure in their power. They will not need soldiers patrolling the streets. We will control ourselves." In this day and age, we are exposed to enormous amounts of propaganda, some of which is used for the purpose of manipulating us into thinking and acting in ways which only further the interests of small minorities. The purpose of this lecture is to examine propaganda and communicate information which will hopefully enable individuals to arm themselves against the dangerous effects of propaganda. It should be noted that we will draw largely from the classic work by Jacques Ellul, Propaganda, the Formation of Men's Attitudes. Propaganda can be defined as a type of persuasion tactic which displays three general characteristics. Firstly, propaganda is deliberately made by an individual or group of individuals, called the propagandist, for the purpose of manipulating individuals into adopting certain ideas and behaviors. Secondly, propaganda never presents an issue in a clear and unbiased manner. Instead, propaganda attempts to present one side of an issue as if it were an absolute truth. Adolf Hitler, who with the help of his propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels implemented one of the most massive propaganda campaigns of the 20th century, captured this characteristic with these words: "The function of propaganda is not to make an objective study of the truth and then set it before the masses with academic fairness. Its task is to serve our own right, always and unflinchingly."
If you're interested in business, accounting is the language of business.
Finally, propaganda tends to use psychological manipulation tactics and to play on the emotions and prejudices of individuals so as to convince them that the idea, action, or attitude they adopted was one they chose through their own personal volition. This last feature of propaganda is what can make it especially dangerous. Jacques Ellul provided a chilling description of the individual whose personality has been thoroughly molded by propaganda. When he recites his propaganda lesson and says that he is thinking for himself, when his eyes see nothing and his mouth only produces sounds previously stenciled into his brain, when he says that he is indeed expressing his judgment, then he really demonstrates that he no longer thinks at all, ever, and that he does not exist as a person. It should be noted that as a persuasion tactic, propaganda is value neutral, or in other words, neither good nor bad. The 20th century propaganda theorist Howard Laswell wrote that propaganda as a tool is no more moral or immoral than a pump handle. While propaganda is merely a tool, moral judgments can be made regarding the ends for which propaganda is used, and it is because propaganda has so often been used for nefarious purposes that today it is widely considered as evil in and of itself. Propaganda, according to Philip Taylor, author of Munitions of the Mind, can be distinguished from education in that while propaganda tells people what to think, education teaches people how to think. However, as educational systems have long been used as vehicles to disseminate propaganda, the distinction between education and propaganda is often blurry. As a persuasion tactic, propaganda in one form or another has been used for virtually the entire course of human history. Yet the word propaganda was first used in 1622. In that year, Pope Gregory XV established the Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith. The main function of the congregation was to defend the doctrines of Catholicism.
Okay, I like to pause it here to elaborate on some things, particularly this part of the video. So what many people don't quite understand is how, particularly the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, have been responsible for a lot of the atrocities committed against humanity over the last 1,000 years, up until this point, in which they still engage in manipulation, destructive tactics against humanity, all for the sake of perpetuating their lies and to enrich themselves and to behave contrary to what they tell society, particularly society that are Christian based, how to live. And many of us who are Christians or religious tend to hold these people, the Pope, as some sort of king, right? Some sort of leader or ruler. But we must understand the history of the religion that most of us practice today, and those who created that religion or those religion, and what was their true purpose, okay, as opposed to what they teach, because they certainly do not practice what they teach or believe. So propaganda, particularly modern day propaganda, started with the Roman Catholic Church, its popes and bishops, in order to manipulate people into indoctrination of their created religion.
Against challenges arising from the Protestant Reformation. The early 20th century is usually identified as an important turning point in the history of propaganda, as it was during this period that so-called modern propaganda emerged. What differentiates modern propaganda from all earlier forms of propaganda is the use of mass media, such as radio and television, as a medium to disseminate propaganda. Britain and the United States were the first countries to utilize mass media in this manner, and thus the countries where modern propaganda originated. The utilization of mass media allowed propagandists to reach audiences on a scale never before imagined. The American George Creel, author of the book How We Advertised America, is considered one of the forefathers of modern propaganda. Creel was a friend of Woodrow Wilson, who was the president during America's entry into World War I. Wilson called on George Creel to organize a committee which came to be known as the Committee on Public Information, or the Creel Commission, whose purpose was to create propaganda in order to transform the attitude of the American population into one of war-hungry patriotic excitement. As Noam Chomsky explained, such a propaganda campaign was highly successful. The Creel Commission succeeded within 6 months in turning a pacifist population into a hysterical warmongering population which wanted to destroy everything German, tear the Germans limb from limb, go to war and save the world. Britain also made extensive use of propaganda during World War I, and Hitler, who once famously stated, "Propaganda, propaganda, propaganda, all that matters is propaganda," was intrigued by the success of the Allied war propaganda. Explaining the effect such propaganda had on him, Hitler wrote, "But it was not until the war that it became evident what immense results can be obtained by a correct application of propaganda. Here again, unfortunately, all our study had to be done on the enemy side, for the activity on our side was modest, to say the least. For what we failed to do, the enemy did with amazing skill and really brilliant calculation. I myself learned enormously from this enemy war propaganda." One of the most prevalent types of propaganda, and the type which will concern us for the remainder of the lecture, is political propaganda. Political propaganda is propaganda used by a government, state, or political party for the purpose of altering the ideas and behavior of individuals in order to achieve certain political or economic ends. All political propaganda is vertical propaganda, in the sense that it is made by a propagandist who creates and implements propaganda while standing over and above the ignorant population.
All right. Before I continue, I just want to say a disclaimer that I do not own the rights to the video. Okay, I'm using this video under the Fair Use Act, in which I'm given a commentary and also for educational purposes. So, just wanted to put that disclaimer out there.
Classic propaganda, as one usually thinks of it, is a vertical propaganda, in the sense that it is made by a leader, a technician, a political or religious head, who acts from the superior position of his authority and seeks to influence the crowd below. Such propaganda comes from above. It is conceived in the secret recesses of political enclaves. It uses all technical methods of centralized mass communication. It envelops a mass of individuals, but those who practice it are on the outside. People often assume that political propaganda mainly consists of lies, fabrications, and extreme distortions of reality. Hitler is famous for claiming the bigger the lie, the more likely it will be believed, while Arthur Ponsonby, the author of the book Falsehood in Wartime, once wrote, "When war is declared, truth is the first victim." Yet, as Ilol pointed out, although political propaganda sometimes consists of big lies, modern political propagandists more often than not are committed to the use of true facts. In other words, true facts are chosen and presented to the public, yet only for the purpose of supporting and substantiating false and distorted interpretations of events. The reasoning behind this tactic is that if one questions the interpretation put forth by the propagandist can provide evidence that the facts they presented were true, and therefore fool the public into thinking that their interpretations must also be true. Propaganda is necessarily false when it interprets and colors facts and imputes meaning to them. It is true when it serves up the plain fact, but does so only for the sake of establishing a pretense and only as an example of the interpretation that it supports with that fact. Another common misconception about political propaganda is the belief that the masses would be better off without it. While such a view seems fairly sensible, Ilol thoroughly disagreed with it. Rather, Ilol believed that political propaganda imposes meaning and intelligibility on the often chaotic course of world events. While individuals of centuries past would often look to the church to provide such explanations, now more often than not, people look to politicians. And it is political propagandists who impose order and coherence on history through the creation of stories which place.
Okay, so the church and politics and politician, the very entities that lies to the people, that distort the truth, that hides the truth and the facts, and uses propaganda to achieve their means. This is why the separation of church and state exists within the Constitution of the United States. But today, there have been many within the political and the religious institutions that are seeking to create or to destroy the separation of church and state, and to create an intertwined intermixing of religion and politics. But this is nothing new, because again, this started with the Romans in terms of creating through political influence and the co-opting of religious belief or of a religion to create something new, in which this is a state created religion for the order, for the purpose or the agenda of that state maintaining power without going to war. Okay? But again, in order to spread that influence beyond its borders, it will go to war in order to do so, as we've seen throughout history with religious wars. Okay?
The state in an almost deified position. Propaganda eliminates anxieties stemming from irrational and disproportionate fears, for it gives man assurances equivalent to those formerly given him by religion. It offers him a simple and clear explanation of the world in which he lives, to be sure, a false explanation far removed from reality, but one that is obvious and satisfying. It hands him a key with which he can open all doors. There is no more mystery. Everything can be explained thanks to propaganda. It gives him special glasses through which he can look at present-day history and clearly understand what it means. It hands him a guideline with which he can recover the general line running through all incoherent events. Now the world ceases to be hostile and menacing. In this lecture, we will consider the role of propaganda in modern-day democracies. A democracy is based on the notion that the voting population has influence on the policies which a government implements. However, Hillel proposed that modern propaganda has given democratic governments the power to desecrate the democratic process by increasingly deciding on policies independent of the voting population. After policies have been created by those in positions of power, propaganda is then used to shape public opinion and manipulate the voting population into desiring exactly what the government has already decided to do. The point is to make the masses demand of the government what the government has already decided to do. If it follows this procedure, the government can no longer be called authoritarian, because the will of the people demands what is being done. As Hillel warned, when a democratic government uses propaganda to convince the masses to want what it has already decided to do, in reality a democracy no longer exists. Once democracy becomes the object of propaganda, it also becomes as totalitarian, authoritarian, and exclusive as dictatorship. With his critique of modern democracy, Hillel was in no way attacking it solely for the sake of discrediting it, nor, in his analysis of propaganda, was he belittling the modern individual who he thought to be a willing victim of propaganda. On the contrary, as he explains in the following passage, Hillel thought that to warn one of the dangers which propaganda poses both to society and the individual is of the greatest service to mankind. For it is only when a danger is recognized as a danger that mankind can fight against it. To warn a political system of the menace hanging over it does not imply an attack against it, but is the greatest service one can render the system. The same goes for man. To warn him of his weakness is not to attempt to destroy him, but rather to encourage him to strengthen himself. I insist that to give such a warning is an act in the defense of man, that I am not judging propaganda with Olympian detachment, and that having suffered, felt, and analyzed the impact of the power of propaganda on myself, I want to speak of it as a menace which threatens the total personality.
All right. It was a very short video.
Everyone.
Okay. Now I'm surprised Edward Benet was not even mentioned in this video, because there was another video that talks about propaganda and Edward Benet was mentioned in it. So maybe a video that they may have taken off. It happens, sometimes when even web channels or YouTube channels like the Academy Idea, sometimes they will also infiltrate these channels, these organizations, because again, many people do not understand or don't want to understand the development of mind control weapons using directed energy frequencies to change or shift the thinking of individuals. Okay. So there will be a time when there will be no need for propaganda in the sense that how they will use advertising, using politicians speaking lies masquerading as truth. But you will be programmed within your own mind with propaganda without the use of visually impacting your mindset. And that is the most dangerous form. Okay. And it is happening today. So we must all understand this. Edward Benet wrote a book called Propaganda. And like I said, I'm surprised that his name wasn't mentioned because he is known today as the father of modern propaganda. And let me go to my Kindle. Okay, so here we go. This is a book called Propaganda by Edward Benet. I just want to read a few passages from this book. Okay, just from the introduction, actually. So prior to World War One, the word propaganda was little used in English, except by certain social activists and close observers of the Vatican. And back then, propaganda tend not to be the damning term we throw around today. The word had been coined in 1622 when Pope Gregory the 15th, frightened by the global spread of Protestantism, urgently proposed an addition to the Roman Curia, the office of the propagation of the faith, Congregatio de Propaganda Fide, would supervise the church missionary efforts in the New World and elsewhere. They are to take account of and to deal with each and every concern of the spread of the faith throughout the world. Far from denoting lies, half truths, selective history, or any of the other tricks that we associate with propaganda, now that word meant, at first, the total opposite of such deception. Of the sheep now wretchedly straying the world over, Gregory wrote, especially it is to be desired that, inspired by divine grace, they should cease to wander amidst heresy through the unhappy pastures of infidelity, drinking deadly and poisonous water, but be placed in the pasture of true faith, that they may be gathered together in saving doctrine and be led to the spring of the waters of life. The word seemed to have retained its strongly Catholic aura well into the 19th centuries, and often, when the user stressed that Roman origin, the word would be pejorative, derived from this celebrated society, the Congregatio de Propaganda Fide. The name propaganda applies in modern political language as a term of reproach to secret association for the spread of opinions and principles, which are viewed by most government with horror and aversion, writes the British chemist William Thomas Bandy in 1842. However, while the word then could be used to make a sinister impression, it did not automatically evoke subversive falsehood, as it has since the 1920s. In the English Traits, 1856, for instance, Emerson used propagandist as an objective, not at all suggestive of the stealthy spread of some pernicious creed or notion. He describes the British as still aggressive and propagandist, enlarging the domination, the dominion of their arts and liberty. A passage that associates propaganda not with alien subversion, but the most enlightened ruled. The laws are hospitable, and slavery does not exist unto them. What oppression exists is accidental and temporary. Their success is not sudden or fortunate, but they have maintained constancy and self equality for many ages. Prior to the war, the words derogatory use was far less common than its neutral uh, denotation. Here, for example, is the claim and accurate definition given by the Oxford English Dictionary. Any association, systemic scheme, or concerted movement for the propagation of a particular doctrine or practice. Thus was propaganda generally perceived not as an instrument for striking horror and aversion in the souls of government officials, but as an enterprise whose consequences might seem horrid or innocuous or even beneficial, dependent on its authors and their aim and the perceiver's point of view. A campaign to improve public health through vaccination, sanitary cooking, or the placement of splitoons was or is no less a propaganda drive than any anti-clerical or socialist or nativist crusade. Evidently, this fact was apparent to few who used the word, which did not become a synonym for big black lies until the Allies made the word familiar to the masses of Great Britain and America. Until then, propaganda was the term so unimportant that there is no definition for it in the great 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, which does include a short entry for propagate. The war had a complex effect on the repute of propaganda, although the practice had, albeit unnamed, but variously used by governments for centuries. Napoleon was especially incisive on the subject as well as an inspired practitioner. It was not until 1915 that government first systematically deployed an entire range of modern media to rouse their population to fanatical assent. Here was an extraordinary state accomplishment, mass enthusiasm at the prospect of a global brawl that otherwise would mystify those very masses, and that shattered most of those who actually took part in it. The Anglo-American drive to demonize the Hun and to cast the war as a transcendent clash between Atlantic civilization and Prussian barbarism made so powerful an impression on so many that the worlds of government and business were forever changed. Now, public opinion stood out as a force that must be managed, and not through clever guesswork, but by experts trained to do an all important job. Thus, the war improved the status of those working in the field of public persuasion. Formerly, the lords of industry and commerce had often seen the advertising, sorry, advertising agents of as a charlatan associated with a tar dry buncombe used to peddle patent medicine and cigarettes, and trying to sell a service that any boss with half a brain could surely manage on his own. The nascent field of public relation also had been disesteemed by those atop the social pyramid, who saw the sort of work as necessary only on the vaudeville circuit and on Broadway. The Great Ally campaign to celebrate or sell democracy, etc., was a venture so successful and it seemed so noble that it suddenly legitimized such propagandists who, once the war had ended, went right to work messaging or exciting various publics on behalf of entities like General Motors, Procter and Gamble, John D. Rockefeller, uh, General Electric. And so, from the signing of the Versailles Treaties to the crash of 1929, there was high excitement in the booming field of peacetime propaganda. That reborn generation of admin and publicists, no longer common hucksters but professional, sold their talents to big business through a long barrage of books, essays, speeches, and even extolling the miraculous effect of advertising and or publicity, i.e. propaganda, as the opponent of the craft and their corporate clients often kept referring to it. Quietly, according to the propagandists, evangelical self salesmanship, many of them were in fact the sons of ministers. Their revolutionary science would do far more than make some people richer. So, again, we see the correlation between religion and propaganda. Okay? Where are we at here? Okay. Just as during the war, propaganda would at once exalt the nation and advance the civilizing process, teaching immigrants and other folks the modest means how to transform themselves through smart consumption into happy and presentable Americans throughout the 20s as propaganda earnest advocate DeVoley pushed the fake progressive line. Propaganda seemed, at least to those who peddle it, a wondrous new progressive force capable of brightening every life and every home. That quasi religious pitch was memorably made in books like Ernest Elmo Catkins' Business the Civilizer, Bruce Batten best-selling parable The Man Nobody Knows, and less distinctively in countless other works of what we might call propaganda. Okay, so I'm just going to end this right here. It's a lot, but I just wanted to do this video just to show you guys that what is happening today has been happening, you know, over the past centuries, and how religious institutions, religious leaders, and politicians are in bed together, okay, in order to shape our minds, to create a way of thinking that is indoctrinated within our minds through propaganda. So we have to ask ourselves, who are we really? Are we a product of our own mind? Or are we a product which has been created by those in power? All right. And I can tell you that who we are today as groups of people, particularly in certain societies, is shaped by those who are in power. And anyone that deviate from the programming is labeled and attacked in various ways. Okay? So you really got to sit down, think, take the time, and really understand how your conditioning, how our conditioning is a result of those that are in power. So, do we really have free will? Do we really have the freedom to believe that when we make a decision, it is based on our own accord, on our own way of thinking? Or has our decision been influenced by the program and the programmers? Okay, so again, something to think about. You know, I just wanted to do this as part of the educational series, in which I will do also along with my regular targeted individual videos. Okay, so thank you. If you watched the video, please like and share, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Or actually, I should say, I speak to you guys on the next video.